Hello and welcome to the Kennel Connection webinar on invoices and receipts. My name is Scott. I'll be your presenter for this webinar. For those of you watching this live, my contact information is available in the chat window. I can be emailed at scott@bluecrystalsoftware.com, or you can call me at 888-486-4343, extension 307. Excuse me. Today we'll be going over invoices and receipts in Kennel Connection. On your screen you should see Kennel Connection 6.0. There are a number of different ways to create invoices within Kennel Connection. But the first thing I would like to point to is some of the setups revolving invoices in the system. For that we're going to go to the File tab at the top and then go to the Setup section and choose System Options. The first thing I want to point out in the System Options section is that with Kennel Connection 6, we do have options that allow you to control when you are prompted to create an invoice. These are in the individual module tabs. And we have the option to prompt for an invoice creation at check-in, or disable invoice creation prompt at checkout, which is the Kennel Connection default. So with these settings, you can choose to have a prompt at either beginning or end, or to have no prompts at all. Then over to the right, we have the Invoice tab. And the Invoice tab, we have settings that control how invoices are calculated and how they appear to you and your customers. At the top left-hand corner, you'll see we have tax registration number and the ability to show tax number on invoice or not show it. You can also change what things are called on the invoice, such as your invoice title, your tax title, your discount title. At the upper right-hand corner here, we can even choose what your currency is referred to in your invoices. Below the currency setting, we have the option to include exercises, feedings, and medications on the invoices. If you do not want to charge for any of these services and you want to keep them off the invoices, you can uncheck the box and they will not appear on the invoice. However, if you just remember that if you choose not to include a service on the invoice, it will not be billed for. So you only want to do this for services that you are not billing for. New in Kennel Connection 6, you also have the option to choose whether or not items show on the invoices individually in the list section. But if you want to choose an entire range or entire service, this is where you would uncheck the box to remove that from your invoices. Below that, we have an invoice footer. Entering a greeting or message here and checking the automatically include in new invoice box will result in this message appearing automatically whenever you create an invoice. If you leave this box unchecked, you can have this message pop up manually by clicking the Get Message button on the invoice. Below that, we have our terms of payment. Again, if you want to have terms of payment you want to appear on the invoice for your customers, enter that information here. It'll appear automatically. And below that, we have settings for our late fees. You can choose a grace period, a late payment type, whether it's a percentage or a flat rate, whether or not to auto charge, and whether a fee is applied once or compounded after every number of days. Please keep in mind that if you do set up a late fee to charge automatically at a percentage and compounding every number of days, if you leave unpaid invoices unattended in the system, as months go by, the late fees will increase exponentially, and you could end up with a invoice after several months of hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of late fees, which can cause issues with your revenue reports and make it harder to settle that invoice with your customer. Also, you'll have an option here to change or modify what late fees are called on the invoice. Below that, we have other visual settings. We have the use logo on reports. If you have a company logo and you want to have that appear on your invoices or reports, You'll want to enter it in here. Like pictures in Kennel Connection, any logo you want to add has to be entered into the Pics folder on the KC6 folder. Any item entered in here will appear. You can link to it from here. You'll want to keep in mind to keep that picture square because that's how it's going to appear on the invoice or report. If it's not square, it's going to adjust it for that, and you might see some distortion in your picture. Also, we have an option to require a name with a customer. We can include pet photos on invoices or prompt for print destination when invoices are created, prompting whether or not to print it to the printer or the screen. We can show map ID or client notes, choose whether to show employee name or choose as timestamp, and choose whether to have the default sales type as customer sales or cash sales. With these settings, I want to point out that the require name and the show employee name, those are both going to refer to the name of the employee creating the invoice and not an employee that is receiving any kind of commissions or performed these services on that invoice. For the default sales type, this is going to decide which type of invoice opens automatically when you create a new invoice that is not directly linked to a customer. If you have, if you have a high volume walk-in cash only clientele, you may want to choose the cash sales. Otherwise, you may want to have it come up automatically as customers. This prevents accidentally creating the wrong kind of invoice if you put it to the kind that it most frequently occurs in your facility. Now, as I mentioned before, there are a number of different ways that you can create invoices within Kennel Connection. The most common way is going to be upon the creation or completion of a booking, checking in or checking out in the system. We also have the money bag at the top. We have a money bag icon here in the quick access bar, and again in the accounting tab in this ribbon right here. Clicking on the create invoice icon, the little money bag, will create a blank invoice. As you can see, I have customer chosen as my default, so it comes up with a blank customer window. This can be accessed by clicking the little browse button, which brings up a search screen. Enter last name or any other criteria for your customer. Choose a customer from the results list, and that customer's name and contact information will appear in the invoice. Upon opening a fresh invoice, if you want to change it, you can change it to the cash sale or back. However, once you start creating the invoice, you want to make sure that you do not switch it from customer to cash or vice versa. And as you can see here, if we're going to switch it to customer, what's going to happen is you're going to cross data in the system. If you get halfway through creating an invoice and you suddenly realize it was cash or customer when it should have been the other one, the best option is just to cancel the invoice and start over again. You can also create invoices from a schedule by right-clicking on a booking and choosing Create Invoice. Kennel Connection will prompt you if you want to create an invoice for this booking. And if you say yes, it'll give you a number of options. If you have the pet sitting module, it'll ask you if you want to include pet sits. We can also create a new retail invoice or cancel. In this case, since I said yes to creating an invoice for this booking, the bottom two options are not available. So if I'm on the if I'm on the schedule and I choose create invoice and I say no to creating an invoice for this booking, it is going to bring me up a blank invoice again to search for a customer. Once again, the most common way that customers will create invoices is upon check-in or check-out. In this case, I'm going to check this boarding out. It's already checked in. So I'm going to check this boarding out. And as you can see, I have it set for this invoice prompt, asking me if I want to create an invoice upon checkout. Clicking yes. Once again, I have these options. I'm going to choose all pet sits. And then the invoice opens. You can see here that we have created an invoice for the booking. All the booking items have appeared in the invoice. I want to go over some of the basics of your invoice setup. Again, we have the customer and cash. It's already at the customer with the customer's information. You definitely do not want to change this to cash sale at this point, as we have booking information in here, and that's going to cause cross of data information. If for any reason there's any kind of issue with this invoice and you need to make a cash sale as well, or if you make any kind of errors on the invoice and you just want to start clean, we can just cancel out of this invoice. As long as the invoice has not been saved by clicking OK, this booking still has not been invoiced. So I can go back in again, click Create Invoice, and I'm going to get the exact same information because Kennel Connection recognizes that an invoice has not been saved yet for these items in the booking. Excuse me. Over here we have the scan button. If you are using a barcode scanner, check this box, and then you can scan additional inventory to be added to the invoice. Otherwise, additional items can be added manually. We have the date, which can be backdated if necessary. Invoice number, which is sequential. To change the sequence, change the number in an invoice, and the invoices created after that fact will follow the new sequence. We have an employee drop-down list to choose the employee that is creating the booking, or the invoice, excuse me. We have a discount section. Kennel Connection 6 has a special section for discounts where you can preset discounts to be added to invoices in the system. So in this case, I can bring this drop down, and here we have preset discounts for military, senior citizen, and a new client discount, which I have set up in the system to apply automatically for new customers, in which case when we open up this invoice, that new client discount will already appear at the top. As you see, when I select the invoice discount, the box fills with the percentage that was set up in the system, and that discount is applied to the entire invoice. It shows up here under the invoice discount. That's reflected here. We can also add discounts to individual line items in the system. I'm going to set this back to 0 for the moment. Each line item in the system, in the invoice, has a percentage column section. We can enter a percentage discount in that percentage column. And when I tab over, that will apply to the invoice. Again, we have the discount showing. You'll notice that the discount here is showing on this top discount, where if we added a discount here, it shows on a separate invoice discount. For any discount set up here for the invoice discount, that is going to be a discount off of the total invoice. Anything involving line items will be invoiced via line item. So if you want to add a special discount for this invoice, let's say 13% across the board, if we enter it in this box here, that'll be applied to every line item in the system, and that's going to show up here under the top less discount because that is accruing those discounts for the individual line items. Really not much you need to know regarding that, except why there are two separate discount lines in case somebody asks. So I'm going to leave the senior citizen discount on this one. And again, when you make changes to your invoice, all those calculations are going to show here. This will always be the current calculation for amount due. Below our line items, we have any past due or credit amounts on the customer card appearing here. Below that, we have our statement message. Again, in my system options, I have it set to show automatically. If you don't, and this is blank, you can bring that message up by clicking the Get Message button. And of course, you can always modify the message on individual invoices. You also have the option to email the invoice to the customer if you have email set up in Kennel Connection and if the customer has an email on their account card. And you can print a tip preview. Excuse me. The tip preview will bring up the invoice with an additional tip line if your customer wishes to add a tip to the invoice and calculate the total themselves. We also have the option on whether this invoice is to be printed automatically, and if we want to send a copy of the invoice to the company email when it's emailed to the customer. Below that, we have our loyalty points set up here, where we can award loyalty points based on a preset loyalty program or redeem any award points the customer has. In this case, a couple thousand here. The reward points setup is a bit involved. If you're looking for more detail on that, we do have a webinar specifically on the new discounts and reward points setup in Kennel Connection 6. I highly recommend checking that out. That goes into great detail on how to set up these discounts that I've talked about up here and to set up your reward point system. Once you've entered everything into your invoice, once again, when you create your booking invoice, even though these items have been attached to the booking, we can modify the prices. We can also modify the quantity. Please keep in mind, however, that any items that are related to the booking, for example, in this case, the board, groom, and bath that were drawn from the booking when we created the invoice, these items have to be in the invoice so Kennel Connection can recognize them as being invoiced from the booking. So if you change the quantity of 1 to 0 because you don't want to charge the customer, or if you delete an inventory line item by highlighting it and clicking the delete key on your keyboard, that item will disappear from this invoice, but it will appear on the next invoice you create for this customer, as Kennel Connection is going to recognize this item as being uninvoiced. So any booking related items that appear on an invoice that you don't want to charge the customer for, the only accurate course of action is going to be changing that each to 0 to remove that cost. The item will still appear on the invoice, but will appear with a 0 cost and will not count towards the total. I'm just going to change that back to 20 because I do want to charge for that. Now, items that have not been that did not originate from the booking, for example, this leash, which I added to the invoice after we created it, I can delete this or change the quantity to 0, and that will not have any effect because that item is not linked to a booking, so Kennel Connection is not going to attempt to re-invoice for that item. You can also modify the descriptions after you create the invoice if for any reason you don't want to keep the descriptions that come up standard, or if you need to change dates or any other thing, you can change those descriptions as well. Also, taxes are set up in the inventory section to attach themselves to items that come up in the invoice. If you want to modify that, however, you can always check or uncheck tax boxes for the desired effect. Once you're done fine-tuning your invoice, you have the option to click OK and save it, cancel out of it, as we mentioned before. You can take payment, redeem a gift card, or print. If you are using the credit card module and you are processing credit cards through Kennel Connection, this take payment button is going to be split in half. One side is going to say pay, and the other side is going to say quick CC. If you click the quick CC button, it's going to open up a receipt that is automatically set to receive a credit card information. So once that quick CC button is clicked and the receipt opens, you can immediately swipe the customer's credit card, enter their information manually, or draw that information from the customer account. If we click pay or take payment, that's going to open us right to the receipts screen. In the receipt screen, we have our deposit ticket ID, which defaults to the current date, and our reference, which defaults to the payment method. You can modify either of these. So if you use a specific type of ticket ID for accessing receipts in the system, or you want to make a specific reference for that receipt, you can enter that information in here. One thing to keep in mind is that the reference defaults to the payment method. So if you're going to modify the reference, be sure to do so after you change your payment method and not before. Because anything you enter into here, just some random numbers, is going to be overwritten when you change that payment method again. Again, we have the date, which can be backdated if necessary. We have the amount paid, which you will not be able to affect. That's going to be affected only by what happens down here in the receipts section. You can open the cash drawer using the cash drawer button. We can select a bank account if you're tracking your bank accounts for separate services in Kennel Connection. If you're not, don't worry about it. This is not going to affect anything. New to Kennel Connection, we have the option to attach an employee to any tips being given by your customer. Simply enter the tip, select the employee, and when you run your tips report, any tips that have an employee attached to them will be designated as such on the tips report. And of course, at the right, we have a number of options for what to do with the receipts. OK, cancel, print. We can email this receipt to the customer, again, if they have an email on their account. We can also have a carbon copy of that email sent to our company email address. If we're creating a credit card receipt, we can get the credit card information from the customer's account. And we can also redeem gift certificates from this screen as well. The receipt information section is where we're going to select which invoices we're taking payment on and how much money is being given. When we create an invoice receipt for a customer, the receipt screen is going to show all invoices that have not yet been paid in full, not just the one that you have open and you have chosen to take a payment on. In this way, you can take payment on multiple invoices at once. You'll notice the balance due in the bottom right-hand corner is going to reflect the total of all invoices showing over here, not just the one we've selected. In order to take payment on an invoice, we're going to click the box in the pay column next to the invoice. So if I click this item, for example, the default of Kennel Connection is to take the amount due and transfer the entire amount to amount paid. The theory is that the majority of your customers are going to be paying in full. You'll notice the amount paid at the top is changed to $355 instead of $335. It is counting the tip into the calculation. For the purposes of just making clear what's happening in this section while we're making modifications, I'm going to remove the tip, which is hard to do once you've already added it, obviously. So I'm going to, there we go. Reapply that. We now have $335 as the amount paid, the amount in full transferred over. Balance due is showing us $35.10 because we still have these two invoices that we have not paid. Now, if we want to pay this in full, we just check this box, click OK, and that invoice has been paid in full. However, if you need to modify the amount, you can do so by just highlighting it. Let's say this customer is giving us, they only have $400 bills on them, so they're giving us $400 as payment. As you can see on the right, we now have the option to give change or attach credit to the customer's account. If change is selected, the change due shows here. The amount paid is still showing as the full amount of the invoice, and the balance due is just whatever's here, whatever's left that hasn't been paid. If we change it to credit, the amount paid now shows as $400, and the overpayment shows here as a credit being applied to the customer's account. The easiest way to keep track of this, if you get confused by what's happening at the top of the screen as opposed to what's happening down here or over here, is that the amount paid section at the top of the receipts window is showing the amount of money actually being handed over to you by the customer. So in the case of the customer underpaying, say they only have $300 on hand instead of the $400, you notice now the amount paid is showing as $300 only. Balance due is at $70.62 because of the remaining balances. If we choose to pay all of these, we're going to see the amount paid total. If we add the tip, that tip's going to add to that total because that's the amount being paid over. Prepayments and deposits are also applied here as well. They will show up in your receipt screen as a negative amount. You choose them and they will apply to the total. The amount paid will reflect how much money is being handed over physically by the customer. Any difference between that and what's actually being paid using prepayments will be a prepayment or deposit in the system, because those items have already been paid before and you already have the money. So it's not technically considered revenue being handed over. Once you've made any modifications, you click OK to save the receipt. It will close and the invoice will show the remaining balance. Now, while we have this open, I also want to demonstrate the easiest way to take a split payment from a customer. And we're just going to use the one invoice we're paying right now for $335. Let's say the customer wants to pay $200 in cash. They have $200 bills on them, and the rest they're going to put on their credit card. The quickest way to do this, you can't split a payment in the receipt. You have to create two separate receipts, but we don't have to go through a lot of trouble with that. All we have to do is click on the invoice, modify the amount paid to $200 being the cash amount. We'll make sure we have that selected as our payment method. Again, we'll notice that the amount paid is showing us $220 because of the tip. I'm going to take away the tip. We'll save the tip for the credit card payment. So we have an amount paid of $200. Balance due is the remaining balances. Cash, click OK. The receipt saves and closes. Any changes made to the receipt automatically appear on the invoice. The invoice has been updated and saved. So if we look down here, we now have an amount due of $135. We're showing the amount paid of $200 already having been paid. Without closing the invoice, I'm going to click Take Payment again. The receipt reopens. We have the same invoice here, but with the new adjusted amount due. I'm going to click that again, add that tip that's going on the credit card. It's not $120, it's too big of a tip. Change cash to the credit card they're using. And the balance due of $35.10 here is still the two remaining invoices. The customer, if it wants to pay those off as well, will add those. Balance due is now $0. We have our total amount paid, including the tip, on the credit card. Just click OK again. And now that remaining balance has been paid. So here you've taken two separate payments on the same invoice without closing the invoice. Now, once you take the payment on the invoice, or in a situation where you create the invoice but the customer's going to pay it later so you don't take payment on it and you click OK, these invoices can be accessed from the customer's account. We're going to right-click here and go to Open Customer. Quickest way to get to a customer from the schedule. And we click on the Financial tab. In the Financial tab, we can find invoices, payments, discounts, and credit card information. Just to go over credit card information quickly, Kennel Connection now has the ability to save up to 3 credit cards on file to apply towards payments. Out of the discount section, we have the ability to create discounts specifically for individual customers. Just to keep this focus on invoices and receipts, I'm going to again refer you, if you have further questions regarding this aspect of the program, to check out our webinar specifically on discounts in the loyalty program. Under the Invoices tab and the Payments tab, we're going to find all invoices and receipts for this specific customer. If we scroll down to the bottom here, as I have mine listed in reverse order, we're going to find the invoice I just created here. We can see the amount due and amount paid. I can open the invoice from here to take a look at it or make any modifications that need to be made. Receipts can be found under the Payments tab, and unlike Kennel Connection 5, in Kennel Connection 6 you can now also open up receipts from the customer account by double-clicking if we need to make any modifications or just to take a look at it. A quick word on modifying invoices or receipts. please keep in mind that any modifications you make to an invoice or receipt are going to affect the invoice or receipt they're attached to. Kennel Connection keeps an open communication between the two. So, for example, it's easier just to show it here. On this invoice here, it's paid in full. As we can see here, let me cancel out of this. So here we have the invoice, number 642, 335, balance paid in full. If I open up the receipt and I modify the amount paid by, let's say, $35, and I click OK, the invoice section is now going to show that the invoice has $35 due on it. Some other options we have in invoices and payment sections that are new to Kennel Connection. We have the option to have the customer blocked from receiving receipts or invoices through email. Checking these, if we decide we want to email the invoice to the customer, Kennel Connection will physically stop us from doing so. We can also print a statement out for the customer or print out individual invoices or receipts from these payment tabs and invoice tabs. The only thing we really can't do to invoices or receipts from this section is delete them. And for that, we'd go to the accounting section, where we're going to find the invoices and receipts for the entire system. That's at the top under the accounting tab. And in the accounting section, you'll see we have invoices and receipts. When we go into an invoices section, there's an option here to display receipts. The receipts section has an option to display invoices, so you can toggle back and forth between the two of them if you're researching anything. I'll go back to invoices for the moment. Invoices are listed in chronological order. Information at the right shows us the date, last name, amount paid, whether or not it's connected to the QuickBooks Direct link, the invoice number in question. All that information shows up on the right. Also new to Kennel Connection, we have the ability to search for specific invoices. Simply put the invoice number in here, click search, and any invoices attached to that invoice will appear. The same thing for the receipts section. If we go to receipts and do a search for an invoice number, any receipts that are connected to that invoice will appear. And again, we can open up invoices from here as well and do everything that we can do from the customer card. As I mentioned before, we can delete. Keep in mind, again, as I mentioned, if you delete receipts that are attached to invoices, those invoices will then show as having a balance due. And Kennel Connection will not allow you to delete an invoice if a receipt is attached. We can also print from here, send a carbon copy to our company email the invoice to our customer when we email them, or display receipts, which I just went over. And we also have a returns button. If you're going to refund money to a customer, you want to do it from the invoices section and click on the returns button. Let's pick an invoice that has some items to it. Let's do the newest one. When you click returns, it brings up a return refund invoice. You'll notice that all the quantities are 0. To refund an amount to a customer, simply choose the quantity you want to refund. In this case, let's refund one of the board days. Enter 1. Do not enter a negative number. Kennel Connection changes the numbers to negative automatically. If I tab over, you'll see the number changes to negative. The amount being refunded applies here. And the customer is being refunded this $90. You'll also notice that any taxes that were paid are also calculated into that refund. Keep in mind that when you do a refund, Kennel Connection will not allow you to refund more than the invoice is worth, and it will not allow you to refund more than an individual line item is worth. So if I try to refund $100 for this, it's going to reject that. But I can refund less. Once you've entered into refund amounts being given back to the customer, you want to click Issue Refund, which opens up a refund receipt. Make any adjustments that need to be made for payment method, employee, etc. Click OK. And now, when we go back to our invoice receipt section, highlighted in red will have that refund receipt. It's going to show us an amount paid being a negative amount, meaning you gave the money back to the customer. In our receipt section, we'll also show a refund receipt, also in red, recording that as well. That way, that revenue being returned to the customer shows up in your accounting reports. In the receipt section, we have the same options here. We can add, modify, delete. We can go back to the invoices section, email the receipt along with a carbon copy if necessary. And we can also create prepayments here. If your customers want to pay money ahead of time or add a credit to their account, especially if they want to add a credit with a credit card, because you will not be able to you will not be able to run an invoice with a negative amount if the customer is using a credit card. And we do recommend against creating invoices with negative amounts. It can pose a problem from an accounting standpoint. So to make sure that your revenue reports all equal out properly, you want to go to your receipts window, choose prepayment credit. The prepayment receipt will open. Choose the amount the customer wants to put down as a prepayment or a credit to their account. Payment method, and click OK. Oh, in this case, we need to choose a customer as well. So we're going to choose whichever customer. Enter their name. Their information appears automatically. Click OK. And we'll now see that receipt as well. Keep in mind that prepayments entered into the system create receipts but not invoices. So if you're running, if you're trying to compare invoice reports, sales reports, with receipts reports, that could be one of the reasons why you will not get a matching total. If you have receipts that are created for deposits, they're not going to show an invoice as well, and then you're going to have a discrepancy. And while we're on the subject of invoices and receipts, I like to point out that if you have employees set up in your Kennel Connection program and you're having them log in and out with IDs and passwords, you can set up the access rights for individual employees. And very important, you can restrict the access certain employees have to modifying or deleting invoices and receipts. That can be very useful in preventing internal theft, or just from keeping employees who aren't supposed to be. Virus database has been updated. Let me get my avast out of the way, and can prevent employees who aren't supposed to be messing with invoices and receipts from creating issues in the system. That's roughly it for the basics of invoicing and receipts. For those of you watching the live webinar now, please feel free to enter any questions you might have in the chat window, and I can go over them. I can go back and elaborate on something, or go over something I might have skimmed over that you're looking for more detail on. So just please feel free to enter those questions in the chat window, and I can answer them for you. For those of you watching the Kennel Connection video of the webinar, be sure to check out the other videos posted on YouTube, or to go to anymeeting.com/Kennel Connection and check out our live webinars. Sign up for them with the question and answer session at the end.